G'day folks, and welcome back to the channel. Ziggy here. This is going to be about the Object 279, the strange history of a strange tank. This is the Object 279 in its game form, and this is the Object 279 in reality. Well, it's an artist impression of the Object 279, so but you can see the vast difference between the game form and the reality tank. So this game is going to be running in the background is Slav Robin's game in the 279, fantastic game. Slav Robin is the artist formerly known as Runaway Brave Sir Robin, so while that's running we'll talk a little about the history of the tank. So by the mid-1950s the situation with heavy tanks in the USSR was rather difficult. Of the tanks already in service, the IS-2 was severely outdated. The IS-4 was deemed to be too expensive to manufacture, and the IS-3 suffered from poor performance. You also had the T-10, which was not well protected against modern anti-tank weapons. In other words, at the moment when the country was facing the impending and increasing danger of fighting a war on a nuclear battleground, the Soviet tanks Soviet tank arsenal consisted of 4 types of heavy tanks, each of which could not meet the perceived threat of modern theatre of operations. Therefore, the main armoured directorate of the Soviet Ministry of Defence announced the requirement for a 5th model. The onset of the nuclear age and the risk of starting a war with the use of weapons of mass destruction set a new parameter for Soviet tank designers. The Soviet deemed it necessary to create a tank that was ready to fight and survive on the nuclear battleground. A tank that could protect the crew from radiation, easily overcome any obstacles on the ground, and be resistant to being turned over by the shock wave created by a nuclear blast, all whilst weighing no more than 60 tons. The Object 279 is an example of an extreme design approach where conventional tank designs are thrown out the window for one design priority. In the case of the 279, that was to survive a nuclear explosion and be able to fight back. This is the reason for the flat-bodied flying saucer shape. Such a design was supposed to prevent the machine from being turned over by a shockwave of a nuclear explosion. Competing designs were the Object 277, an upgrade of the T-10, an Object 777, a completely new design. Interestingly, the 777 is coming into the game as a Tier 9 Frontlines tank. In the next Frontlines campaign, it'll be a reward tank. The tank was developed at the Kirov plant in Leningrad, with work on the tank started in 1957, based on design requirements set down in 1956, with first pre-production tank completed at the end of 1959. So basically 2 years from design to the first completion of the first production tank. This unique design featured increased cross-country capability through its 4-track running gear mounted on 2 longitudinal rectangular hollow beams, which were also used as fuel tanks. So the fuel tanks of this tank is actually underneath the tank in those hollow beams. The tank suspension was hydro-pneumatic with complex hydro transformer and 3-stage planetary gearbox. The specific ground force of this heavy vehicle did not exceed 0.6 of a kilogram per centimetre squared, and that was by far away the lightest ground force of any Russian tank designed to date. The track train ran practically along the whole length of the hull, provided for increased cross-country capabilities on swampy terrain and soft soils. It also proved effective in breaching hedgehogs and other anti-tank obstacles. The tank was equipped with a powerful 1,000 horsepower diesel engine, enabling the 60 metric ton tank to attain a top speed of 55 kilometers an hour and an active range of 300 kilometers on one refuel. It also had auto firefighting systems, smoke laying equipment, and combat compartment competing of cooling system with chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear protection. In Russia that's called CBRN protection. In, I guess, the NATO forces it was called nuclear, biological and chemical protection, NBC. The armour, the tank hull with a maximum armour thickness of 269 millimeters, 10.6 inches, was covered by a thin elliptical shaped shield protecting it against APDS and shaped charge ammunition. This thin outer skin was the key design feature in preventing the tank from being overturned by the shockwave in the case of the nuclear explosion. As well as providing spaced armour from protection against heat projectiles, it also proved effective against penetrating rod rounds. So that's AP, FSDS, APCR, whatever you want to call it. It is effective by changing the trajectory of the rod as it passed through the outer skin and caused it to strike the inner armour at an increased angle, and thereby changing the thickness profile of the inner armour. Interestingly, the protection against the rods appeared to be a fortunate unintended consequence of the UFO-shaped outer skin, as I can find no mention of it being a design requirement of the outer skin. This was something not effectively utilised on Western armour until the late variants of the German Leopard 2A5. Its heavily angled wedges applied to the front and sides of the turret. This was, so if you have a look at the 2A5, it's got really pointy edges on the front of the turret and the sides of the turret. This was probably due to the fact that NATO never came up against a 279 and probably didn't even know of its existence until much later. If you go to Matsimus or Scottish Koala's YouTube channel, both great guys by the way, I suggest you go over to the YouTube and have a look at them and subscribe to them. I'll put a link in the description of a talk about the shaped armour of the Leopard, and I think you go to about the 20-minute mark to see him talking about the Leopard. The inner armour was comprised of a large cast irregular shaped structure of variable sloping and thickness, and the all-cast turret with a maximum armour thickness of 319 mils was rounded and had anti-heat protection panels. The turret ring was also heavily protected. So for the armament, the gun had a 130mm rifle gun firing 2-piece penetrating rod, heat and HE rounds with 24 round capacity. The main gun was provided with semi-automatic loading system with a rate of 5 to 7 rounds per minute. Fire control system comprised an optical rangefinder, auto guidance system and a night sight with an active infrared searchlight. The secondary armament was a 14.5mm KP-VFT coaxial machine gun. Both weapons were stabilised vertically and horizontally by a Groza stabiliser. So, you may be asking, after watching Robin's game here, how on earth you kill a 279? The answer to that is fairly straightforward. Be Nikita Khrushchev. That's right, be the one person in the world who has total control over Soviet tank design. On July the 22nd, 1960, at a demonstration of new technology at the Kapustin Yar site, Khrushchev categorically banned the adoption of any tank into the Soviet armed forces, weighing more than 37 tons, and thereby killing the Object 279, the Object 277 and the Object 777 dead in their tracks, and basically the whole heavy tank design era of, or the whole heavy tank era of the Soviet Union, and thereby ushering in the Soviet MBT era, which went on to shape world tank and world tank design forever to this day. So it seemed that the only thing needed to be effectively kill the objects, let's call them that, was a shortish, balding man who wields a lot of power in the Soviet Union. Who'd have thought? This is the Object 279, guys, that we need to have in the game, I believe. There's only one example of this existing today, and that's at the Kubinka Tank Museum. Rather impotent. It's a non-working example, but it still exists. So that's about it for me. Thank you very much. Don't forget we're recruiting, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video if you liked it, and leave a comment. Tell me whether you like these formats of videos, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much. See yous.